I got a bone to pick with you.
Oh.
Yep. You did something a long time ago and it really pissed me off and we never resolved it.
Okay. What hit me up?
When you spoiled Game of Thrones on social media,
yeah,
I think if I would have seen that spoiler without having seen it first, I think you would have burned that bridge, Steven.
You know what? I have no regrets. I saved a lot of people from that day because you know what I did for them? You've seen the end of The Dark Knight, right? Sometimes you just got to have a fall guy. And there is a lot of people who etched in their minds when they think of Game of Thrones, they have a hatred for me that they can focus on instead of hating on the absolute utter shit that was the end of Game of Thrones. And I'm glad that I can be the fall guy for that. I'll take that. You know what? I'll take that.
It was a complete fucking dick move. It was a complete dick move. When you have people that are invested in a show for like 10 years and then you oh man.
I think you're like slightly to the left of me, but I think pragmatically, I think we agree on almost anything. There was no realistic path forward for 15 an hour minimum wage, right? We acknowledge that. Even if somehow we could have ignored the parliamentarian, there was just no path forward for that, right?
Even if you take out every other senator besides Manchin, he was a hard no. And so my position that I've been fruitlessly trying to convince, like I've been better about arguing less on Twitter. It still happens, but the idea that Joe Biden himself personally killed the $15 an hour minimum wage.
Or hates it. They don't want to fight for it. They're betraying their promises or whatever. When it's like, as part of the COVID relief bill, like this is really where he had to make his last stand. Like it's so dumb.
A must pass bill, and it had to pass now. It had to pass soon while these unemployment benefits run out in the middle of March. So they were up against the clock, and this was not a fight. I had some people in my chat saying, do you agree that Biden should now like put pressure on Manchin and Sinema to capitulate when it came to the $15 an hour minimum wage? I said no. What's the point? Like there's like the next time they can do reconciliation is in a year, but even then the parliamentarian is probably going to come up with the same ruling. You can override the parliamentarian, or you can overrule the parliamentarian, or the VP can, but you still need to have the votes in Congress, and the votes just weren't there.
I wish that people would be more fixated on like, do you know what quiz time? What do you think is the best way to get a 15 an hour minimum wage?
Well, I know your position is to do it on a local level.
Not even that. Just like say we would do it at the federal level. I don't know why I'm asking you. We both agree on the answer. It's to get more Senate seats, right?
Elect more Democrats to the Senate.
Yes, that's how it has to happen. And this idea that like this rhetoric that we are holding on to the razor thin margin granted to us by the vice president, and people want to start like primarying those Dems, and it's like, holy shit! Like we haven't even caught our breath.
Well,
like,
good luck primarying Manchin. I mean,
that too. And progressives have tried in the past and failed miserably. But like, can't we just expand our majority, please? Please?
So is it fair to say that you probably align with progressives on like most issues, but maybe your issue is the same issue that I have, which is the issue of strategy?
I align with progressives at the end on almost everything. It's just that all of them are so stupid. But otherwise, like in terms of strategy, because strategy is where we disagree on everything. Every single progressive complaint boils down to, I wish I lived in an authoritarian regime and I'm so pissed off that this is a democracy. That's literally every single progressive complaint. Like, I wish I could abolish this. I wish I could abolish that. I wish we could just do things through parliamentary. I wish we could do things through budget reconciliation. I hate the Senate. I hate the House. I hate everything. Like, it just seems to come down to like we need to destroy as many processes as possible without realizing like, well, hey, what if instead of like a 50 Senate majority, what if we had like 54?
Instead of like, stupid when it comes to classifying progressives, what if we use a label like youthful zeal? What were your beliefs like when you were 20 years old? Because
really, I was a Ron Paul supporter, so I would say fucking stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I was stupid. I would say I was stupid 4 years ago, 100%.
I used to lecture people about religion and politics at the ripe age of 20 when I didn't know shit. 100%. I had just taken like 4 college courses or whatever, intro to Soch and fucking history 101 and stuff like that, and I took every opportunity I could to lecture people. And looking back, it's cringe as fuck. But
hell yeah.
But that's a necessary part of the process. You got to go through. You got to go through the cringe phase to get to the. The
problem is just social media has amplified so much of these toxic and ineffective voices that it like I'm worrying that it's. Because like for so long of my quote unquote lefty arc, I always had the conciliatory at the end of the day in that, like, well, at least they're not that politically effective. So, okay, like we can just move on. But
it's not like you don't want them to be politically effective.
Well, the problem is that the problem is that instead of trying to grow like their own movement, they just want to be like a cancer inside the Democratic Party and then fight and kick and scream and cry inside of that body in an unproductive manner. Like, that's what bothers me. Like, if progressives were starting to work around the country and they were starting to like upset people in moderate districts, then goddamn, fucking A+. That's amazing. That is awesome. If progressives were pushing the Democrats further left on policy in a way that was still complementary to the party, then fucking A, that's awesome. I firmly believe that the only reason, well, not the only reason, but the primary reason why we're talking about a 15 an hour minimum wage now is because Bernie was in the primary and lost. He pushed Hillary on it. And I think he pushed a lot of other people on it too. I really firmly believe that, which is awesome. That's great. Mm-hmm. But people are so destructive and white and suburban, and it triggers the fuck out of me. I hate it so much when you get these people that are like, I either want 15 an hour or I don't want fucking anything. Well, yeah, no shit, because you don't earn 15 an hour. You don't earn any wage. Your mom and dad still pay for everything. Like, what do you mean? Like that type of toxic all or nothing mentality, and if we don't get exactly what we want, we're gonna burn the fucking house down, is so cancerous. I'm being a little bit inflammatory. I'm sorry, but man, that triggers the ever-living fuck out of me.
However, I do think that you and I suffer from sort of the same affliction where maybe we think that what the bulk of like the cringy takes that we see on Twitter is actually representative of the broader electorate, and that's just simply hasn't been the case so far. Like if you pay attention to, I mean, there are a lot of like really good like lefty people that I follow on Twitter that don't fall into this category. So let me just say that I consider myself a lefty. I consider myself a progressive. If you just paid attention to sort of like the Sean_vids and the fucking shoe on head and like like those kinds of people, you would, if you followed nothing but those people, you would think that Biden has had like the worst 2 months of any modern president. Like you would think that his presidency is going down in flames, that the Democrats are inevitably going to lose the midterms in 2022, and his 2 months in, he's already a massive failure. If you look at his approval rating in the aggregate, it has been steady and solid, rock solid.
I think higher than Trump's like ever was throughout his entire presidency, I think.
Of course. Yeah, he's like in the RCP's aggregate, I think he's like close to 54, 55 right now. There are some polls that have him higher, like 61, 62 or whatever. Yeah. I think there's a hard ceiling as far as how high he can get, just because of how inculcated people are, the sort of bubbles that they operate in. But I do think that once this thing passes, and especially when people start getting their checks and people start getting their healthcare subsidies, when families start getting their child allowance, they're like Biden bucks for kids, I think you're going to see his approval rating really reach that ceiling. Like it wouldn't surprise me if he got as high as 63, 64 or whatever in the aggregate. The highest he could possibly get is 65, I think. And I think the Democrats are poised right now with the passage of this COVID relief bill, even without the $15 an hour minimum wage, which is a bummer. I mean, I know you disagree about that, but
I think it would be good optically. It's not like something. It's not a hill I would die on. I think it's not good economic policy, but if they passed it, it'd be really good optics for the party, and it probably would help out like a decent chunk of people.
If the Democrats in Congress and if Biden continue to have the rest of the 2 years play out, or the rest of the year and a half plays out like the last 2 months, I think they're in phenomenal shape to expand their majorities in the Senate and the House, especially with the Republicans really digging their heels in and positioning themselves to be obstructionists for policies that are extremely popular. The normal pendulum swing sort of logic doesn't really apply here, I don't think.
Which is what I was praying for at the start, and I think you too, is that like, as long as the Democratic administration focuses on these like universally popular positions, I think it's going to be so easy to villainize the Republican Party. As long as we don't get some crazy like gun ban or some stupid like highly partisan Democrat like backed thing going through, as long as we focus on stuff related to the economy, the coronavirus recovery, stuff like that, I feel like any obstruction from the Republicans is going to play so badly. And then hopefully, hope to God, 2022 comes in and we expand our majority in the Senate by a few seats. Then we can start with like the really ambitious policy, which would be awesome, but which is incredibly scary because I think historically, it's generally normal that a president loses like one half of Congress, like the incumbent generally does, right?
The only exception was George W. Bush in the immediate aftermath of September 11th.
Yeah, which
I feel very optimistic right now, but that isn't the vibe that you get when like there's a lot of
if you're on lefty Twitter, it's basically like America is this shithole where everything is just getting destroyed and nothing is happening, and like and it's all like based on half truths too. And I see you argue a lot of this. I live vicariously through you now because you don't have the reputation I do, so you still get to argue with these people without them running from you. But I see you suffer the same frustration. So like the child cages are just as bad under Biden as they were under Trump, and Biden hates the 15-hour minimum wage, doesn't want to fight for anything, and Bernie and AOC are fucking sellouts and blah blah blah. So yeah, like the Jesus Christ, it's insane. The vitriol, I'm a big fan of the idea that like if you're like a radical progressive, then obviously your fight doesn't stop with Biden, and you should keep fighting. You should continue to push left, and I think that's good. I think that's awesome. Yeah, keep pushing for more and more and more. But the vitriol, is like insane.
There's smart pressure, and then there's completely
self-destructive.
There's completely inconsequential, or I guess self-destructive would be. There's smart pressure, like you can pressure someone like Biden on to move left on issues. He demonstrated that throughout the primaries. His platform shifted, and I think he is genuinely interested in rising to this moment. However much he may fall short in your view, I do think that he is a shiftable person. Someone like Manchin. That motherfucker is a rock. He's a boulder, just chilling there. Like he didn't respond to the kind of pressure that we saw, and so
why would he though? He's not getting replaced by a more left-leaning Dem. Like,
well, clearly someone like Manchin he's not feeling the pressure in West Virginia. Like his constituents, he's not feeling the pressure to buckle on $15 an hour minimum wage. So you can talk about national polls and be like, well, the $15 an hour minimum wage has got fucking 70%.
Polls well, and like no one gives it in West Virginia. They don't give a fuck what they think about in New York and California, dude. No one cares about these national polls. People need to learn that the obsession with taking a national poll and trying to beat like a representative or a Senate over the head with it. It's like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? Like, they don't look at national polls. They don't give a fuck about this right now. Like,
you mentioned vitriol. I mean, you like to delve into the vitriol a little bit. I mean, is there something about the fight that gives you energy? Do you enjoy conflict in terms of your?
Oh yeah, hell yeah. I mean, from a personal level, of course, I grew up on fighting with people on the internet, so that's fun for me.
Have you ever had an instance where it was too much conflict and you ended up not enjoying what followed?
Only when dealing with lefties, because lefties have kind of all like the corporate power behind them right now. But other than that, I mean, the more the merrier, I guess. It's fun for me. It's like I can deal with infinite amounts of problems from the right because they can't really do anything. Like the worst I get are death threats or FBI visits, but I don't think I do anything mega illegal. So whatever. I guess if one tries to kill me someday, that'll be bad. But the left is really scary because they have all the corporate power for like canceling you or getting your getting fired or departnered or unsponsored or whatever. So it's a lot more scary to kind of like tangle with the left online because they have so much more power right now in terms of like capital behind them.
How old is your son?
9 years old. He'll be 10 years old in 2 days.
Years old. So I'm curious as to how have you given some? I'm sure you have, but I don't know. And tell me if you don't want to talk about it. But have you given some conversation as to how you're going to approach when he gets to the age where he can Google and find all these controversies? How do you plan to have that conversation with him? Or if
I'm super open with my child. If he wants to talk about anything, we just talk about it. I don't have like that weird parent shit where you're like scared to talk to your kid about something or you're shy or whatever. Like if he ever has questions or whatever, like we're pretty open. And I think he knows that. Like he seems like pretty comfortable asking me questions about things. And so I hope that like level of openness continues. But then I mean that's all I can do basically, right?
Well, was there any other part of that conversation that you wanted to shoot the shit about? I mean,
sure. I don't know how much you do like foreign policy. Nobody really cares about it, and it is really boring. I acknowledge both those things. There are just two things that I would ask people, and this is kind of like this. One of these things, like ultra, kind of like gave me a more realistic impression of foreign politics. People are always so quick to point out like U.S. involvement in the Middle East is destabilizing, right? Like you hear that like a million times. Like okay, maybe, and so people are like, oh, the U.S. needs to pull out everywhere. It's like. Well, okay, maybe.
Well,
go ahead.
Wait, maybe. Mm-hmm. I mean, like take a look at the invasion of Iraq. I mean, like you would acknowledge that was extremely destabilizing.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so. But
like you would acknowledge that like Iran supporting the Houthis in Yemen is destabilizing, or Iran supporting Hezbollah, across nation states next to Israel is destabilizing,
or Russia's involvement with
Syria,
in
Russia,
Syria,
and involvement in Syria. Like Turkey's involvement with the Kurdish people in northern Syria is destabilizing.
Saudi Arabia's involvement on the northern border of Yemen, it's so.
Yep, and all the Sunni extremism across the Middle East is destabilizing. Iran's involvement with Hamas in Palestine is destabilizing. Like there is so much shit that goes on in the Middle East that like the 25 IQ take of like America bad, America destabilized the whole region. Motherfucker, everybody is fighting in the Middle East. There's a lot of conflict there.
Certainly,
and the idea
our
that
footprint has been larger, I would say.
I mean, we're the bigger country, so yeah, of course, to some extent, right? That's almost always going to be true. Like all of the world's ills can, to some extent, be traced back to America, but a lot of good can as well, which nobody likes to give us credit for ever.
Can you talk about can you reference what you view as a stabilizing U.S. Influence in that region?
In that region, not necessarily, but like I think that like the U.S. intervention in Bosnia, I think, is incredibly positive. It's like one thing to point to, although we're going like 20 years back. In terms of like our position in Iraq, we tried to help that country, but I think we had to leave after we fucked it up. But we kind of had to leave because it was just so politically untenable, which fucked everything up.
I don't like we. I mean, the Bush administration.
I say we because we're the U.S. I mean, right? Like
right. With the support of like 85% of the country at the time. But
I'd say the first Gulf War where we came in and kind of like slapped Saddam Hussein from gassing the Kurds and the Kuwaiti invasion and everything, like that was probably
he did gas the Kurds, but I think that was before that. But I mean, when you look at the first Gulf War, we had an opportunity to arm insurgents, rebels that would have fought against Saddam's regime, and we didn't, and we left them out to dry, and then Saddam used chemical weapons on them as well.
Yeah, but that's always so hard to say, right? Like we armed. Because like when it came to the Soviet Union in the 60s, right, we armed like the Mujahideen and shit, and we gave them weapons, and then that didn't turn out too great, right? Down the line, we get organizations like Al-Qaeda and Taliban, and depending on which region or which area we're talking about. So, I mean, like the idea of like arming rebels is sometimes popular, but that's a really hard one. We tried to arm rebels in Syria too, for instance, and there's a lot of different, I don't know like what the truth is versus like where a lot of those weapons ended up, but I heard a lot of crazy stories, from different people that would report that like, we would try to send in weapons through Turkey and a lot of them would just get hijacked, or they would go to quote unquote anti-Assad groups, but they would be part of the more radical people that were part of the anti-Assad groups, because there were like 30 different fucking factions that were fighting in Syria against Assad. So
what about Korea? Korea was another example of American intervention. Like North Korea had pushed Southern Korean forces all the way down to the southern border, southern tip of the peninsula there, and with American support, the South Korea ended up pushing them back, and then we had the establishment of the two different states and all that.
Yeah, I'm just saying that like a lot of people around the world are very invested in the idea of foreign interference, and the idea that it's just the United States that does it is really silly, especially when you compare that to Iran that exists in the region, that is also an incredibly destabilizing force there. Not to say that that's bad on their part. I mean, I think they should be, right? But like the whole IRGC, that arm that Soleimani was the head of, like their whole goal was like foreign interference and everything. Like that's kind of what they did. So I just like, I'm not going to sit here and lie. It's like, oh, the U.S. does things to help democracy and blah, blah, blah. I don't like this idea that it seems to get it passed on a lot that like, oh, the U.S. is the only destabilizing force. You know, that one picture where it's like what the present would look like if this one thing happened, and it's like a meme and it shows like a futuristic. It's like that. It's like, this is what the Middle East would look like if the U.S. wasn't there. Like, that's not true at all. Like, there's so much conflict in this region. It's
incredibly complicated. I've recently tried to up my literacy when it comes to the Syrian conflict and the Yemeni conflict, and it's so complicated. There's like so many different actors involved in these struggles. At one point there was like 5 or 6 different groups vying for control in Syria, and like each one of those groups has like a complicated history. And so when you try to research this stuff, it's no wonder that foreign policy is usually like, I mean, after September 11th, that changed. But these days, foreign policy is like really low on the list of priorities for American voters. It's usually like the economy, immigration, these days, COVID relief, that kind of stuff.
Unless we're like involved in like some active war or conflict where we have like troops on the ground, very few very few local people like in our country are going to care about it.
Yeah. I was on a panel on Friday and we did a whole section on foreign policy, and I felt I really don't like engaging in conversations where I feel like I haven't done the proper amount of homework. And the problem is you have to take like a 4-year course on the history of that region to to be adept enough to tackle a conversation like that. And it got to a point in the conversation on the panel where I felt pretty uncomfortable. I was like, I don't feel like anybody here is really qualified to like opine on these issues. I mean, everybody agrees that like war is a bad thing, and we don't like, obviously we don't want like regions destabilized, people displaced, or people killed, but there are consequences to inaction as well.
Exactly. And that's what people don't realize. Yeah. If the United States doesn't step up to be like an actor in an area, or to have influence in some area, to help people in some area, people will look to other people for that leadership. Like that's been our relationship with Iraq has been so crazy and rocky that like after we pulled out, the prime minister there was talking about, the U.S. isn't really helping us with a lot of shit, especially related to ISIS. Like maybe it is time to look to Russia for some guidance on this, because they seem more like politically willing to, commit, some level of reinforcements or some level of assistance. And that's just, it's really, really, really hard. All of that is so hard. And I hate that people have this one-dimensional like U.S. bad view of things,
Well, I mean, there are a lot of atrocities to point to, which makes the conversation like really difficult to have, because for a lot of people, the conversation begins and ends with just pull everybody out and bring them home,
which is not possible. But yeah.
I mean, like, how do you feel about Biden's first couple months here? Is there anything that you wish he would have? Are there any criticisms that you have of Biden so far?
Biden is in a very unenviable position. The U.S. government is built on like this foundational idea that change should be very slow moving and very difficult. And we're more hyperpartisan than we've like ever been in all of fucking U.S. history. So Biden is in a very rough spot with a 50 Senate majority. It seems so far, I was focusing so much on like my other projects going on that I hadn't paid too much attention, but it seems like for the most part, things have gone like fairly positively. Like they got their big coronavirus bill passed. Most of the EOs that I see seem to be pretty good. A lot of the reversals of the Trump EOs seem to be pretty good, especially the ones related to like some of the immigration stuff. So yeah, I mean, things seem to be going decently so far, as long as the more radical elements of the party are kind of kept in check, and as long as they keep getting legislation and stuff through Congress. Yeah.
So as far as addressing income inequality, rather than student loan forgiveness, what do you see as the most efficient way? You talked a little bit about like negative income taxes when you were on that panel that I was watching, but like what would be like if you could pick one policy to zero in on if you wanted to not necessarily eliminate income inequality, but address it to the point where more people in this country aren't living in poverty? What way would you go about doing that?
Oh man, there's.
But you only get one though.
Yeah, my general idea is fundamental services or baseline services should be socially provided for. So like a social safety net is my fundamental. I don't know if that seeks to like alleviate poverty, right? Because my answer would normally be something like some sort of universal healthcare like needs to happen. But I don't know if that would be like the one thing.
Wouldn't the poverty wage, wouldn't that be adjusted if we had public services like a universal healthcare or a free public college or whatever? Like,
yeah, maybe, but like my problem, I don't care. Like people having a poverty wage isn't necessarily a bad thing. The problem is when you can't afford the things that you should have in a first world society. Like,
isn't that the nature of a poverty wage? Isn't that what that is? Like by definition?
Tautologically, if we define it that way, then that's bad, of course. But like if you have like a sufficient social safety net, then almost any poverty wage should theoretically be impossible, right?
I think the median wage, somebody told me in was it Denmark, was like $30,000 a year or something like that, which doesn't sound very high, but when you have access to paid vacation, paid maternal leave, free healthcare, free college, then you can stretch salary like that out in ways that you definitely can't living in a country like the United States, particularly in a state like California.
What would be the best? I think focusing on the biggest problem we have in society right now is there's such a gulf or a gap between college educated people and non-college educated people. I don't know if it's possible, but I wonder if a focus on like the 2-year associate or like the trade school stuff would be an effective way of like narrowing that gap.
You mean just fully subsidizing it?
Yeah, sure. I think that there needs to be some middle ground between having a 4-year degree and just having some high school education, because the income gaps between these two people are way too huge. So something needs to change there. And I've heard people suggest that like the bigger focus on trade schools and 2-year degrees might be the way forward for that. I don't know if that would work. I don't know if there's like empirical data for that to be like, look, like this clearly works. But yeah,
I say, so why stop at associate's degree? I think the idea of free public education is good on many levels, but I think one of the most important levels is you empower people to advocate for their own interests when you educate them. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people that are trapped in this cycle of poverty in this country really have no idea the context of their struggle. And if they were to understand it, then they would respond more favorably to initiatives like union organization.
Yeah, I don't disagree. But I think that like all of these, unfortunately, these have to happen from baby steps, right? Like it's probably more likely if you've got like a single parent family, it's probably more likely that one of those kids can make it in a trade school and then one of their kids can make it in a 4-year school, rather than people that are just don't even consider themselves as being capable of going to college are only incentivized to go to college for 4-year like engineering degrees or something, right? Like I feel like there needs to be some middle transitionary step to slowly kind of move people in that direction. Because unfortunately, like the problems related to poverty are so multidimensional, right? There are racial components because of how criminal justice can deprive households of fathers. There are class components, lower class people, even if education is totally free, lower class people aren't able to go to school because they have to work to provide for their family, or they just can't take 4 years of non-working off their life to just do that.
Also geographical influences,
yep.
You know, like if you're born into a state that has less wealth than other states, it's just a lottery that shitty lottery that you were born into.
There can be health dimensions, you know, like if you're malnourished as a kid, like this affects you developmentally in so many ways.
Oh, yeah. No, actually, I think I read somewhere that the number one predictor of future wealth is access to healthcare when you're a child. I mean, I don't know how true that could be because I'm sure the number one component would be like being born into wealth, but maybe eliminating the other factors. If you have access to good healthcare as a child, you're more likely to succeed in the future. I mean, obviously, this is a really multifaceted problem, and and the problem is that like just changing one thing doesn't work. We have to hit it from like 20 different sides and then go for that slow change over time, basically, which is frustrating because it'd be nice to like say like, oh, if we just do this one thing, you know, we're going to fix everything. But like it has to be hit from multiple areas. And then unfortunately, it has to be a money sink for a while before it becomes like money positive, which is really hard to do in a democracy because you always have pressure to produce results right now. Funny enough, just like capital or private firms, even like private equity firms, right, are like for profit now. It's similar with the government too. Like we need to make investments in things like education and, you know, childhood well-being, and that stuff costs a lot of money, and we're not going to get anything for that for maybe a generation, you know, until these people grow up, go to school, become taxpayers, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it takes. Yeah, go ahead. Would you abolish the Senate, reform the Senate, or just leave it alone?
I'll take, actually, you're trying to hate me anyway, so I don't care. The really unpopular position I have is that I think I fundamentally, am okay with the idea of the Senate. I think that it's important that there is some sort of geographical representation in the states. I don't know if you can just go by pure numbers, because I feel like that would lead to like an unhealthy amount of resentment that would cause so many problems down the line, where there are so many people that would feel like their voices are, and they would be essentially irrelevant and unheard.
I have a problem with that. I mean, like 40 people in one room is the same as 40 people spread across 20 rooms. And I don't see if somebody feels like they don't have a voice, then that should motivate them to organize and spread the good word of whatever policy they're trying to accomplish or something like that, or however many hearts and minds they're trying to change. But
what, do they have to go out of their state to do it? Like they have to like leave?
Well, we have the internet now. I mean, you can do all kinds of important.
Well, okay, we're getting dangerously close to the hashtag learn to code, right? Like I don't think everybody can just jump on the internet and become an internet advocate for whatever.
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it creates opportunities that weren't there 25 years ago. So, we've seen national movements spring out of single events in tiny little states that changed the entire country. And so I just think that there's an opportunity there for people to accomplish what they set out to accomplish on a national scale. But if you're asking me if I feel bad that people in Wyoming, for example, would feel disempowered after decades of being overly empowered, I don't have a ton of sympathy for people in that spot. I mean, would you be open to like every 5 million people adding 2 Senate seats or something like that?
No, because if you're going to do a rebalance like that, you might as well just abolish the Senate and just go by the House, right? I would be in favor of there are 2 big changes to our system that I would be in favor of. One is to make it so that there are more representatives, so that the House of Representatives can be a little bit more proportional, because right now it still favors smaller states, which I think is silly with the existence of the Senate. So I'd be in favor of that, number one. And then number 2, I would be in favor of every state splitting their electoral college vote as well. And then also the rebalancing of the House would also fix the electoral college a bit as well. So those are a bit more proportional. Those are like two changes I would be on board with.
At that point, why wouldn't you just abolish the electoral college? I'm not saying that's a realistic goal, because you'd need a constitutional amendment to do that, and there's just no fucking way that's going to happen probably in my lifetime. But at that point, why would you? That just seems like a half measure. Just get rid of the electoral college altogether. Go to a national popular vote.
Because I think you could still keep it somewhat unproportional. I just like the fundamental issue that we're kind of arguing around here, and I understand a lot of people disagree with me on this, and I might change in the future. But the thing that I'm basically kind of like nibbling around the edges on is that like I think that states, by virtue of being states, I think should have some sort of representation, not just every individual person. Like I think that geography is somewhat relevant there.
Why does the idea of a state hold more power than a group of people, a number of people?
Because I think states are fundamentally different than just the individuals living in them. Like a state has its own interests and a state has kind of its own agenda, and for that to just be forced upon them by states with more people in them, I think is really bad. Like for instance, you said before, like
you're just describing democracy though.
Well, kind of, but like we don't do anything by direct democracy, because that's a huge problem, right? We recognize that.
I'm not talking about direct.
Well, no,
democracy.
But I'm saying what you're describing is direct democracy, right? Where as long as you've got the most people, you should be able to vote on whatever you want and steamroll everybody else.
No, direct democracy would be us voting on each individual measure or something, each individual bill.
Sure, as opposed to like a representative democracy or something.
Yes,
sure, yeah, okay, you're correct. But I'm just saying that like I don't think that it should be like a 1-to-1 vote on everything, because I think that like the example that you gave earlier, for instance, where you have like 40 people in one room is worth one person in another room, and you think that that's fundamentally not okay. Like I would argue that I don't know if, let's say that you have like a neighborhood and 40 people live in one house, and then there are 40 other houses with one person each, and they're all voting on what to do with the neighborhood. I don't know if it's fair that one 40-person household has the same number of votes as all the other 40 houses, is what I'm saying, right?
Well,
like I think, and it sucks. It's not easy. Like I agree that it's not necessarily fair, and I do see problems that come from it, and like I see why people would feel disenfranchised. But it's like at the end of the day, like just saying to all of these other states, like, fuck you. I mean, you have like 900,000 people. Like literally, no one cares about you. Like fuck off and go non-exist somewhere. Like I don't know if that would like harbor or breed some type of long-term resentment, where smaller states are basically like, okay, well everything is proportional and we don't have the people, so I guess fuck us. Especially when smaller states already have so much problem with like keeping people in those states and not just having them instantly move to larger states and everything too. Like
my gut tells me, like my knee-jerk reaction to that question is I do think that a house with 40 people should have the same amount of say as 40 other houses with 1 people each. But that is something I would have to think about, because I don't know if I can properly articulate why I feel that way. But that's just my knee-jerk reaction to it.
Sure. And I feel like other governmental bodies around the world kind of recognize this too. So like the structure of the European Union, for instance, you have your members of European Parliament, which you get more of those based on the population of your country. But then at the end, you've got something called the European Commission, which is like every state gets 1 member in that body, because they realize it's just like, okay, well, if we literally just do it so that the biggest European countries have the most sway, then all of the smaller ones are going to feel like they have no representation, even if they're not of the number of people. And different countries have kind of like different needs. It's one of the reasons why monetary policy in the Eurozone, it has a lot of problems, is because like you can't just have one central bank that dictates policy to every country, when different countries have different problems and different struggles, different needs, or whatever. Yeah.
Maybe you could sway me a little bit on this one, but I still fundamentally have a big fucking problem with the idea of a state like California with 40 million people having 2 senators, and then Wyoming, which has like 900,000 people. Like the idea of checks and balances and making legislation somewhat difficult to pass, there is merit to that. I agree, because otherwise it would just be wildly volatile in this country, but the future prospects of the Senate are really dire, because these population imbalances and these power imbalances in the Senate are only going to become exacerbated over time. And if we get to a point where, we could feasibly get to a point where, we already are at that point, when we have like, what we were talking about before with West Virginia, where you can have a policy like a $15 an hour minimum wage, where 70% of the country agrees that it should be a thing, and it's held out. That's just one example, but like Medicare for all, you could, like, this is a policy that if you just took it for a simple majority vote, I think has a decent chance of passing if we got the messaging right.
Sure.
And the Senate is really the only thing standing in the way of that, which is what leads me to believe that at the very least it needs to be drastically reformed. Some days I'm like, fuck it, abolish it, just roll it all up in the House and just do that. But I do like the idea of there being some there's like division of responsibilities, you know, like having a Senate confirm judges and nominations and shit like that, and then just being an extra check against too volatile of a change. But we're reaching a point where the need for these policies is increasing more and more and more as income inequality gets worse and worse and worse.
I don't know if that problem is with the structure of the Senate or just the increased political partisanship that's happening in the United States as well, right?
I think it's also just the structure of the Senate.
I mean, like we're reaching more and more areas of or a higher era of partisanship where it's becoming harder and harder to do anything with the Senate, right? Like I think that's been demonstrated that like partisan or like votes on Supreme Court justices are becoming more and more partisan, and like support for legislation is becoming more partisan. Where like a lot of these things are literally falling down party lines, like exactly, which is pretty extreme. Something that I want to push back on too is I know that you keep saying, like, for instance, like Wyoming, you know, gets 2 senators, and, you know, California gets 2 senators. It's 40 million people. And that is true. And that kind of like cucks California, I guess, in the Senate. But then on the flip side, you know, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, like none of these states have any say really about what goes on in the House. So it's not like they're getting like legislation that's super favorable to them as well, right? Like they're kind of like cucked in the other half of our legislative body. So, I mean, like, I don't know if there's it's not like a perfect agreement of like where everybody is like getting what they want. Like there has to be some give and take. Otherwise
but they have a tremendous advantage in the Senate and the Electoral College. You get a state like Wyoming that gets 3 electoral votes. I
agree with the electoral vote thing is probably not good. I agree that like that could definitely.
But if you agree with that, then I feel like then you agree with the idea of just going to a national popular vote for the president.
I don't know if you agree with that, because I'm still okay with it being weighed a little bit, but I wouldn't be like totally against like the president having like a national popular vote. I wouldn't be like 100% opposed to that, because you still have the Supreme Court and then you still have the Senate, which like confirms Supreme Court justice. Like that wouldn't be something that wouldn't be a hill I would die on. Like, oh no, we can't do that. So
just logically, it pisses me off that Republicans are going to be hard pressed to win a single popular vote moving forward, I think. And they're, you know,
possibly. I mean, it really depends on
the consequences. Just in the Supreme Court nominations alone are too consequential to ignore. I'm not trying to disenfranchise anyone. I just think that one vote should equal one vote. You know, I think one person's vote in California should count exactly the same as somebody's in Wyoming. I don't particularly agree with the idea that a smaller state should get more of a say because they're small. Intellectually, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. I can sympathize with the idea that issues pressing a state like Wyoming or West Virginia are going to be different from states like California, but we're talking about policies that would affect 900,000 people versus 40 million people, and I don't really understand why.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like imagine, for instance, like so if we take like, let's say people in California and New York and Florida, they all really wanted to legalize all drugs. Let's just say that, like, and I know Florida isn't the same as New York and California, but like I said, that was the thing, right? They wanted to like, okay, screw this, we're legalizing all drugs, like let's do this. And then you've got this whole slew of states in the middle. I almost said the Middle East. Let's say you've got this whole slew of states in the Midwest that are like, okay, wait, we have huge problems with opiates. Like this is gonna fuck us really hard, right? They're fucked. They're just completely fucked. They have no say anywhere, basically, in the government. Right?
That would be bad policy, though, because you couldn't just do like a full legalization across the board without also completely changing our approach to drug addiction when it comes to the criminal justice system.
Oh yeah, sure. I'm not gonna argue. And listen, I'm actually in favor of legalizing all drugs. Okay, so I'm not giving you like a specific policy position that I would fight or not fight or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, hypothetically, we could imagine there could be, and it doesn't have to be, this could be anything, but we could imagine like a ton of different policies that some of the highly popular states would be very much in favor of, that some of the lower populous states would be very much opposed to, and then we're basically saying in a more equally proportioned way that like you no longer have a voice, like as a state. Like we don't really care about Wyoming. We only want to listen to the citizens of Wyoming. And if there's not enough of you, then well, Wyoming is a state. Iowa, North Dakota, Montana, all these other states like just don't matter anymore. You know,
that's democracy,
which I think is a problem for like but we want like a cohesive. We want like a cohesive union. It's like important, right? But you know what? It's entirely possible that maybe Americans don't actually view themselves as like citizens of states anymore, and they just don't give a fuck. And maybe, you know, we could do that, and it actually wouldn't affect anything at the end of the day. Maybe it wouldn't be a big deal. People would still do whatever, and maybe it would be like that is possible too. It's possible. It's not, this isn't like an issue that I'm super married on, but
I definitely think of myself as an American first before like a Californian, but I also recognize that somebody living in Alabama or Mississippi, they're probably not going to have the same answer. Especially like Texas.
Alabama, Mississippi, or there are even other populous states where like that might not, like people that live in like New York probably view themselves as New Yorkers. That's a huge identity to them, right? People that live in like Texas as a state almost anywhere, whether you're rural or a city, like probably view themselves as being Texan before anything else, right? Any state that has like fucking maybe this is my bias as a Nebraska, any state that is big on college football probably view themselves as being like, if you're fucking Ohio State University, you follow football. If you're a fucking Alabama, if you're in Nebraska, right? Like, I think that these people probably view, like, it's gonna culturally depend a lot on, I guess on the culture of your particular state. But it wouldn't surprise me if there's still a lot of Americans that hardcore identified with their state before being Americans.
I'm sure that's the case, but I wonder if the things like COVID and lockdown measures have sort of changed that a little bit, because now, you know, there are a lot of, I mean, it's certainly a lot of states have lax policy when it comes to enforcing restrictions or even issuing restrictions. But yeah. I wonder, and then as the climate crisis is worsened over time, as it inevitably will, even if we were to cut down to net zero today, it would still get worse before it got better. I wonder if these sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Disasters, crises. Yeah. I wonder if these crises will lead to people identifying with, you know, somebody in Mississippi identifying with someone in California if they're dealing with the effects of climate change. But you'd have to like educate people there too. So I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It would be interesting to see if it makes you feel more American or not. Because it seems like external threats do, right? Like 9/11, I think, had us all feeling a certain way. Do you remember how crazy everything was at the start of the pandemic?
I do, vividly.
I remember walking around in my neighborhood feeling like, did you ever watch the Chernobyl miniseries?
Oh, yeah.
It felt like that. I remember like wearing a mask outside in my car, like not being sure what was going to happen. I remember like driving into supermarkets and seeing like the big lines, because here in California, in LA, they had policies at the stores, right, where you had to only so many could go in the stores. So you saw the huge lines outside Ralph's and Vons for people to get in. Yep. And then when you got in, like a lot of the shelves would be cleared out of all the soups and canned foods and everything. Like, yeah, oh man, it was really scary at the beginning. It felt a lot like the movie Contagion.
Contagion's really good. Actually, we rewatched that movie at the beginning of the pandemic last time, which probably wasn't a good idea. But
yeah.
But like going back to mental health a little bit, I am curious because I'm a very anxious person. It's just my disposition. I've always been like that. It's as long as I've been an adult, anxiety has just been a really cemented part of my life. And when I put myself in your shoes when you went through the departnering thing with Twitch, that the amount of anxiety that I would experience from that would be devastating. And and if you're saying you haven't experienced those kinds of things, but like when you experience those kinds of negative emotions and that kind of stress, what do you do to work through that? Because when I was watching that whole thing happen to you, and I didn't particularly like your Rittenhouse take the way that it was, but when I watched the when I put myself in your shoes and imagined the stress that came along with that, it was very unpleasant. And I'm curious to see how you've dealt with the stresses of being a public figure and a controversial one at that.
The answer is incredibly unsatisfying. I wish I had especially after being more reflective past my drug experiences. I think that like a lot of who I am or I'm put together just kind of came at a really early age. Like I was very, very, very independent early in life. And then I was very independent in my adolescent years. And then I was very independent in my early adult years. So I think I've kind of like fundamentally, I kind of have an attitude where I have a way to kind of like check my own thoughts and to try to be like introspective in terms of like, am I being stupid right now? Is what I'm saying dumb or whatever? And then I kind of compare that against what other people are saying. But like at a very fundamental level, I don't really care what other people think about me. So thankfully that like, I think that kind of uniquely equips me to do what I do online. And then generally, because like the way that I argue with people all the time, even in high school, and the way that I would, because I went from being like a very Catholic child to being a very atheist person. And I didn't really have much support externally for people that would like validate my ideas or anything. So the way I would kind of feel like I would test my ideas, like if I feel like if I argue with enough people and people either start calling me names or get very personal or nasty, it means that I must be right because they're not saying anything to kind of like disagree with what I'm saying. And that attitude basically got carried over into my online stuff where, you know, I do a lot of debate, I fight with a lot of other communities. And, you know, if I step into a community at the end of the day and people are calling me like a beta male, you know, bisexual, midget, trans, whatever fuck thing they want to call me, then I feel like, oh, I guess I must be correct. And if people are hating me or whatever, like, I don't know, I don't really care. Like there's very, very, very few people who have opinions that I respect. I could probably count the number of people whose opinions I respect on one hand. So like random like dipshits on the internet like screaming at me or shitting at me is just nothing that I'm really concerned with. The only thing I get scared about is if people can like take my money away is like very scary. Obviously, if I'm gonna get like banned on Twitch, like that would be like pretty nerve-wracking. I think
that was a question that I wanted to ask. Like it used to affect me a lot more. Like I blew up on the internet when I was 26, I want to say. And I blew up. I mean, it was a ton of attention going from somebody who I was just a waiter from like the suburb in Northern California with no kind of platform whatsoever. And that changed pretty quickly. Like I built like a YouTube channel over the course of a year. And then all of a sudden with partnering with Machinima, it just, I mean, there was an audience of millions almost instantaneously. And my ego increased commensurate with my sub count. And I used to really enjoy getting into arguments with like random people on Twitter or social media or whatever. But it did affect me emotionally. I pretended like it didn't, but it did. But that to me, like as I've progressed in this sort of job and career, it affects me much less now these days. Every once in a while, like if somebody's on Twitter like says something about like my dead sister because they have a disagreement with me politically, that does like get to me. But for the most part, I can tune all that stuff out. But if my financial security is threatened, that would be something that would be really difficult to work through. So I wonder when that happened, were you having thoughts like, oh my God, I'm fucked? Or was it more solution oriented? Okay, well, this is my new reality. What do I need to do to, I'm going to be fine. I just need to figure it out.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I guess I should say fortunately, I've been to reiterate, I've been very independent for my whole life. I think when I was 16, my parents, my dad ended up moving to Florida to join my mom, who moved away when I was like 15. I did like work study for all 4 years of high school. So every day after high school for about 2.5 hours, I'd stay and do janitorial work to try to pay for my my high school tuition. And then when I turned 18, I moved out with my girlfriend. I worked at McDonald's and I worked at the casino. So like my whole life, I've been kind of used to like, I don't really have a safety net. Like if I fuck up, like I'm gonna be homeless or fucked basically. So I have to figure out like.
Did you have a authoritarian parents or anything like that? Did you have like, was your dad a military?
I wouldn't say authoritarian. Well, both my parents were Air Force, but it wasn't so much authoritarian. They were just really busy with stuff all the time. So like my mom ran a daycare at her home, and then my dad did multi-level marketing stuff. I don't know if you've ever heard of fucking Amway.
Not really.
It's like Mary Kay or New Vision, or I know every multi-level marketing thing because my parents have done a lot of them.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, but I was basically just kind of like left to my own devices to figure stuff out, and I've never had like my parents ever like pay my cell phone or my car or anything. So I've always had like the mindset where it's like, what do I have to do to move forward? Because nobody else is going to help me do anything. And I think that kind of helps me with the streaming stuff. So, if I got like, as soon as that, I took a day to just melt down over the Twitch partnership. Like, I think I got like super wasted, had a panic attack, figured that out. Cause it's like, okay, well, we'll just have 6 hours and deal with this. And then the next day is basically like, okay, well, let's say I get permanent from Twitch. Like, what do I have to do forward? Like, how much do I need to reinvest my YouTube? Like, are there partnerships I can pick up from other companies like Caffeine or whatever? Like, it's basically just like a solution oriented mindset. Cause if you get lost, like, or at least for somebody like me, like if I get like super lost in some depressive path, my life is over. Basically I have to kill myself because nobody else is going to help me or bail me out or do anything to help my position. So
I do think it's curious. You and I have very similar stories. Obviously there's some major differences, but I was also raised in a Catholic house. My dad was a military dad, really strict authoritarian type, but you were saying that wasn't the case for you. He worked a lot, and so it was just me and my sisters spending a lot of time with each other back in the day. And then when I reached adulthood, my dad, I fucked around with drugs too, or with a lot of alcohol and drugs when I was 18, 19 years old. And it got to a point with my dad where he said, we've helped you for like the last year now, but we're going to cut you off in 2 months and you just got to figure it out. And he stuck to that too. And, there was a point where I didn't have a place to stay. And I asked him if I could crash at their place for a little bit. He straight up said no. And I did have to figure it out. And that was something that taught me the value of self-reliance as well. But there's a lot of like overlap with yours and my story, and I find that interesting.
Yeah, and I wouldn't advocate for it. So like this has been like really hard for my kid because technically I'm in a position where I could kind of provide everything for him. It's hard to tell like because like people respond to similar environments in totally different ways. Like I can cry about it on stream or like people will feel sad for me, but I'm genuinely very, very, very happy at how my early life turned out because I am incredibly resilient. to like external pressure, and I have a big sense of independence and like self-reliance. And I think that those lessons like uniquely equipped me to deal with streaming stuff. But for some reason, it feels like sometimes people can go through similar things and they turn out a lot differently, to where they have huge problems with self-reliance, or they desperately need other people, whatever. I don't know why one thing goes one way or one thing goes the other. It's hard to say. It's probably some combination of getting lucky with some stuff environmentally, maybe lucky with some stuff biologically, like lucky, like, yeah. So, I mean, obviously I wouldn't advocate that everybody like abandons their fucking kids.
Yeah.
And then like, you know, like they'll grow to be stronger people, because I'm sure that fucks a lot of people mentally as well. But yeah.
Yeah. The lessons that people learn at different points in their life can just be chalked up to luck. Because it took me, I've learned, it took me a long time to figure out that I was resilient, but it took me, it really did take me a really long time, but it took going through really shitty, emotionally taxing situations and then coming out the other end of it. So like going through a period of deep depression with suicidal ideation and thoughts of self-harm and stuff like that. And then, you know, having a few of those kinds of episodes. And then every time you come out of that episode, it's just another reminder that your thoughts can't kill you. Your feelings can't kill you. And you know, time can be an incredibly healing thing. And there's a Steven Spielberg movie Lincoln. There's a line in that movie where he says, "Time is a great thickener of things," and that's something that really stuck with me. Like as you get older and you accumulate more life experience, and you prove to yourself time and time again with the support of others. It's not like everyone just pulls themselves up by their bootstraps. Like people get help and they get support, ideally from like family and friends and stuff like that. But the more times you go through that, it's like ammunition. So when you start to get those feelings of depression and anxiety, you remember, okay, well, I've been through this before and I was okay. And so it makes those experiences a little less harmful. It also helps to be able to be like financially secure. That wasn't something that happened when I was in my 20s. When you're poor and you're going through something like that, it can be a nightmare. Because not only are you contending with deep emotional issues, but you're also contending with your own like physical security. I don't know how we got on this topic, but I just figured that it would be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, it sucks because when you're like very poor, everything is do or die. So even if you have the same challenge before you as somebody that's not like super fucked, their experience with it is going to be a lot different. You know, like I compare like stumbling into streaming for me is similar to like you're kind of like sliding down a building and you've got like a ledge that you can grab, and if you miss it, then you slide off and die. Like when you're in situations where you're working poor, and I'm sorry if this comes out a lot of my conversation, but I truly resent the middle class so much. When you're working poor, your life is fucked in so many ways that are so unimaginable. Or at least maybe for me, maybe it's my unique experience. Like my problem with being like super poor, it wasn't really the day-to-day struggle, although that sucked, or like not being able to pay something. Sometimes it sucked or whatever, or like the fights that I would get into my SO, like that kind of sucked or whatever. But like the biggest part for me, the problem with me is that when you get stuck in a certain situation and you're not like 13 or 14 anymore, it feels like you're like every day is like this is the rest of your life and absolutely nothing will fundamentally change. And there's no possible way that you can change your position. Because when you're stuck at a point where you're working full time and you can barely afford your fucking bills, and like a broken wheel or a flat tire sets you back 3 months or 6 months financially, like you're not thinking about like, how am I going to get promoted at this shit ass small business I work at? Or, you know, when am I going to go back to school? You know, like your life is just basically fucked and over. And like every day of like, you have to try to find like the happy little, like, oh, I like talking to employees or some customers that are, because like on a macro level, like you're just kind of resigned and you settle into like, oh, here I am. Like, this is all I'm going to do forever until I die. Yeah.
I used to work at this place called Machinima, and I used to co-host with this guy named Sark, and him and I both had the experience of being, he was a Olive Garden bartender and I was an Olive Garden waiter. And he used to tell me, and he used to, I mean, not at the same place, but like we had the same experience of being like working class, working in a restaurant. And he used to tell me all the time, like, all of this can go away tomorrow. So you need to be prepared to go back to whatever it is you did before. And you should be grateful for every day that you had. And I used to push back on him all the time and be like, I'm never going back to that. Never, ever, ever. And what happened was I became like deeply unhappy with the job that I was a part of at the time. I realized, and it was kind of a nightmare moment, but I realized that I didn't want to do it. And I felt so locked into it and trapped that I got into a really dark place. And what ended up happening is I quit. And then I did end up going back to waiting tables. And that experience, that humbling experience, is something that to this day I found was so valuable. It was such an important gut check. And you know, I did it for like 6-7 months. I came back to streaming. I ended up quitting that, but like that experience of going back, the first couple months, you know, people are like asking me to refill their waters, and there was this little voice in the back of my head, like, you know, do you fucking know who I am? Like, you know, 700,000 fucking subscribers on YouTube, millions of views, and that voice got quieter and quieter over time. And I feel like I came out the other side of that experience a much better, more well-rounded person. I can only imagine getting into streaming when I was 16 or 15 and not having
I
any
feel so
work
bad.
experience for like, I can't.
You see some of these guys that are like at age 19 he typed a racial slur, or he like 19-year-old male sex with 17-year-old girl, and I'm like, damn dude, I'm so glad that at 19 I was, because holy dude, even when I was streaming at 21 I was a fucking moron. Even at 25 I was a fucking idiot. Like I cannot imagine coming into that shit at like 17, 18, 19 years old. I would like lose it. I would do
5 years
my
from
whole
now,
life.
5 years from now, you might say to yourself that you were a fucking idiot right now. I mean,
At
like,
32, yeah, of course, yeah, 100%.
Hopefully that's how it goes. Hey,
but hopefully a little bit less of an idiot. Yeah.
I could keep talking to you for a while. I enjoyed this conversation quite a bit, but I do have to make some dinner. My girlfriend's gonna get hungry. So
yeah, no problem.
Thanks for talking to me, dude. Take it easy.
Yep. At some point we're gonna get food when everything opens up. Okay. I'm down in Huntington Beach, so I don't know how far you are, but yeah.
Oh, that's pretty far, but yeah, we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
Okay. All right.
Well, hey, stay safe. Be careful. I love you, buddy.
You too. Take it easy.
Bye.
Okay.